Howdy, folks, and welcome to Influ-Men-Sirs, the podcast where we explore influential men and their influence on men and the broader conversation around masculinity as a whole. Today, we'll be discussing Ryan Coogler, the writer-director of multiple critically and commercially acclaimed films, such as Black Panther and his most recent movie, Sinners. My name is Caleb Keller, and I'm a therapist based in Portland, Oregon, specializing in men's issues, trauma, and neurodivergence. With me, as usual, are my fellow Influ-Men-Sirs. Frank,
Hello, Internet. My name is Frank Jardine.
Bob,
I'm Bob. I'm an actor and a tech guy. So there you go.
and my new friend, Jeremiah.
Hello. Yes, I'm Jeremiah. I'm here for the show.
Awesome. Perfect. All right. So before we dive in, I thought I'd give a brief overview of the fellow we have in question for today. So Coogler started his career pursuing football rather than film, though his passion for film was always present. A notably good wide receiver, it was primarily when Coogler's written work and some of his film courses at the University of Sacramento were so praised and highlighted by his professors that he paused continuing football to pursue film instead. After attending USC and majoring in film, his short film Locks won him even more notoriety and attention, which then led him to produce and direct Fruitvale Station, his first feature film chronicling the real-life story of the tragic and unnecessary killing of Oscar Grant, an unarmed and innocent black man who was gunned down by white transit police officers in the Bay Area of California, where Coogler is from. After that came Creed, a boxing film drawing from the famous Rocky film franchise, which, like Fruitvale Station before, was highly regarded and received. This, of course, ultimately led to Black Panther, one of the highest grossing films of all time, and in similarly impressive fashion, highlighted an all-black cast, including Michael B. Jordan, Chadwick Boseman, Lupita Nyong'o, among many others, and also Bilbo Baggins. After making a sequel to Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, an impressive feat due to the tragic passing of Boseman himself, Coogler then made Sinners, a genre-defying hybrid movie of period piece aesthetics and tension, vampire horror, rich cultural and sociological critique, and the greatest music video of all time, all done in one single film. Overall, Coogler has now joined other directing titans in the industry to make the creative IPs he desires to, a feat which can't be understated in its difficulty. No matter how you feel about the guy, Ryan Coogler is here to stay and direct movies for likely a long time coming. So, now that we have a baseline grasp of this fellow, I thought I'd start by asking something rather simple. What do we think about him? Let's start with Bob.
Yeah, I've only recently started learning a little bit more about Coogler himself. My familiarity with him is through his oeuvre and the films that he's made, all of which that I've seen, I've enjoyed immensely. And I think that they paint some interesting pictures of what men, and especially men of color, face as challenges in the world today, even in their sort of like fantastical settings. So I like Coogler. The interviews that I've watched with him as well, he seems easygoing, affable, and really just excited to connect and learn from the people around him, which I admire. And that's where I'm at. So I'm coming into this relatively fresh-faced, with the exception of my knowledge and experience with his films. So I'm excited to hear what others have to say about him.
Yeah, absolutely. How about you, Frank?
Well, my first introduction to Ryan Coogler was Fruitvale Station. And when he was relatively unknown, I guess, I definitely didn't know who he was. I just watched the movie and I remember being like, wow, this is really good. And it was my first introduction to, oh my gosh, the actor.
Michael B. Jordan?
Thank you, Michael B. Jordan, who I love. He's one of my favorite actors in Hollywood right now. I would pretty much watch anything he's in. So I've been following, unbeknownst to me, like all of Ryan Coogler's, career from Fruitvale Station on forward until he became a big name. And I was like, wow, like, I'm so glad that he's like accomplishing so much, because I feel like his vision is different and in a good way, where he's highlighting Black struggles and successes. I think that's very amazing. He has sort of a intuitive mind for um, putting those issues on the big screen. And I feel like I am a huge fan of Ryan Coogler. And so, I mean, that's where I'm at right now. I just love all his movies. I haven't seen all his shorts or anything, but I've seen everything from like obviously his Wakanda, his Fruitvale Station, the cartoons that he had produced for Disney, and the even the shows that got not so good of ratings, but I still enjoyed them regardless. I think he is a phenomenal director, a phenomenal storyteller. I can't say enough good things about the man.
How about you, Jeremiah?
So I'm probably the worst at this because I'm always the populist. I mean, like, I knew Creed came out and then I was like, yeah, but I mean, is it Rocky? I don't know. And so I was like, I passed. And then Wakanda, I mean, like, Black Panther came out and I'm such a huge nerd. And I was like, of course I'm going to go see that. And then I was mesmerized by the visual storytelling and the complexity, every intricate detail being represented and brought to life, and no stone unturned. And I thought that was probably the most impressed I've been by a Marvel movie up to that point. And I was like, oh, this is a well deserved acclaimed movie. And then Sinners came out, and I'm not normally a horror person, but it was a good recommend, and I did end up watching it and fell in love with it immediately. I was like, this is a story for me. Like, I find that there's so much in here, and the way that he's telling this story is coming at you sideways. And I just was very impressed once again. So I think and then this week, in preparations for all of this, I went back and I watched Creed out of order. And again, I was just struck by the way that he tells a story. And having listened to him speak in person at an event, I just, even then, before I came back and watched Creed, but even then, I was just struck by what a calming presence he has and what an intellectual mind he has for filmmaking. He's a student of the craft as well. And I think that's what lends him to becoming what he is. And that is a master of this very nuanced piece of material that we call filmmaking. So I have become more and more engrossed by him, both as a person and as a filmmaker, and potentially an auteur.
Yeah, I'm pretty much agreeing across the board with literally everything that everyone has said. Yeah, I think that I remember I was introduced with Panther, and then I saw like, wow, like this is not me making dig at Marvel movies. Like, I promise I'm not doing that, fam. But when I watched Panther, I was like, oh, we're going there. Oh, we got some meat on these bones. There's more depth here than is normally here. And so that was a huge draw for me. I was really curious by that. At that time, Marvel had an issue with their villains, and then we got Killmonger, and we're like, oh, we don't have an issue with our villains anymore. Like, we got it. We nailed it. We've done real good this time. And so then I wanted to see some of his previous work. I saw Fruitvale Station, and then just recently I'd seen Creed on the plane. But the one thing that I think, and we've all of us have kind of said this one way or another, but there's something to the way that he makes movies that has heart that I don't necessarily see, excuse me, from other filmmakers that I might love and consider to be masters. But there's something about the way that he pulls back and focuses really, really deeply on the characters and their struggle, just kind of muting everything else and having it freeze frame on that, which I was really, really moved by. We'll talk about it, I'm sure, as the discussion goes forward. But being in a place of the past year, I grieved something very intense. So revisiting a director who is not afraid of dealing with grief, it was really, really impactful for me. But I'm getting ahead of the game because we saved this section for the end of our pod normally. But yeah. So that being said, kind of switching gears a little bit here, what would you say, based on snippets of what you've seen on his interviews, but also in the filmmaking itself and his storytelling? What is Coogler saying specifically about masculinity? But let's go with Jeremiah.
I am intrigued by this idea. I'm also curious because you guys, obviously we've been talking about this for a long time, but in terms of how you frame that idea in and of itself, the idea of masculinity. But what I see in Coogler is, I don't want to say duality, but I definitely see there is a desire to paint what it means to be masculine in a broader stroke, not confined to traditional norms. There is a toughness in his male characters, but there's a tenderness that is also highlighted. They struggle with being both and finding what I think he's looking for, and I think he's looking for it, but a balance of how to deal with the struggles of life as a male, and then especially as a black male, and then I think he's trying to translate that story that he's telling himself to us. And I think you see that in Michael B. Jordan as a reflection of himself, because I think he sees himself in him, and to the degree that he keeps continuing to make him his main character. And so you're struggling to see, like, oh, what does Coogler think? Because I go, well, I don't need to know what he thinks. I see his reflection in those performances time and time again.
What you got, Bob?
I was thinking something along the same lines with regards to the nuanced view that he has of masculinity. And I think it's my first introduction to Coogler's work was Creed. And I didn't get a chance to rewatch it before this gathering this evening, but I did, I did note at the time that the wonderful kind of tension between Creed, Adonis Creed, who's like so afraid of using his father's name for feeling like he's going to get picked up. My daughter just walked in the room, so my apologies. That he's going to get kind of picked up by the media. And it does happen a little bit that they're like, oh, Creed, they get so obsessed with the legacy of his father that it kind of overshadows the talent and the work that he's done to get to that point in some ways. But he proves, it's kind of that notion of wrestling with that, what's come before to kind of surmount it. And then I think that was interesting contrasted with Sylvester Stallone as Rocky Balboa. And it's like, he's, afraid of, using Adonis, using his father's name, but he's not afraid to get help from like his father's friend and rival, who's also equally famous. And, he could run the risk of like, Rocky Balboa's pupil. And so there's this all to the idea that I think there is that track of legacy and the idea of like how you see it again in Black Panther with Killmonger and his father, and then with T'Challa and T'Chaka, his father, and the sort of like difference in the way that they approached the problems of the world, the problems of facing Wakanda itself, and the lessons they passed down to their sons, and how their sons kind of carried that lesson forward. So those are the kinds of things that I keep thinking about. And it's, I suppose, appropriate that my daughter just walked into the room, because fatherhood is very much on my mind now. And then I think about like his character. I just watched today Fruitvale Station, and it sort of ruined me for the rest of the afternoon, because I had it kind of going on in the background while I was watching it, but then, I just found myself I couldn't look away. And I don't think it's something we can or should look away from. A story like that. But the way that story ends with Oscar Grant's daughter, Tatiana, and the footage of her, the real person, was very affecting. And you think about, the loss that we face. Like, he's also wrestling a lot with loss and grief. And Caleb, again, you've alluded to this, and that's something we can talk about later on in the podcast. But those are sort of the thoughts that I have with regards to his vision of masculinity is often tied up in legacy. And I think you can kind of draw a through line through all of his stories with that, of like, what kind of impression do you make on the people around you? And it's not like, oh, I have to impress them. It's more along the lines of like, how can I be valuable to them and be of service? And that's something that I found was really fascinating about his view about these things.
What you got, Frank?
When it comes to masculinity, I see a trend in all of his movies where he humanizes the character, right? It's not just so much this tough guy, experience that you're watching, whether it's from Fruitvale Station, where, it's not no longer a viral video of a person randomly getting killed by a cop. This is a real human being with a real life who has real loved ones, you know, and we talk about it a lot because it's his most famous movie thus far, grossing anyways. Black Panther, it's not just a regular superhero movie. This person has real depth, where he's struggling to fill the shoes of men before him and living up to those expectations. And we're watching his journey become a full-fledged man who cares about people, who loves people. I mean, the very first scene we're introduced to Black Panther, that scene where he meets, he drops out of the ship and he freezes because he loves this woman and she, tripped him up because he's like, oh, and he's supposed to be this tough guy where we don't get that from movies like, like back in the 80s with Predator or Rambo, or, the women was kind of the side character and something you won instead of something that you actually wanted, like it was just like she was her own character. He was his own person. And I feel like Ryan Coogler brings that sort of spirit and that life to masculinity, that it's very dynamic. It's not just one dimensional. And you see that throughout his movies, especially with his growth and his understanding of being a man himself, growing into masculinity. So throughout all of his movies, I see that. And it's so wonderful to see that kind of perspective on screen for, especially for Black men who haven't had that experience on screen before. We can see their love interest. We can see them cry. We can see, all of the facets that make a well-rounded masculine man. And I feel like he really has a hold of that masculinity and portraying it to the audience.
I think to that point, kind of speaking about the man behind the camera, just because I did have an opportunity to watch and listen to a lot of his interviews, there's a real kindness and humility that is so palpable with so much of what he talks about, and just the way that he phrases things. It seems, and I could be mistaken, but I think in some of his interviews he talks about it, in some ways he gets a little uncomfortable, like even having to talk about the movies themselves. He's kind of like, no, I made the thing, like go watch the thing, right? And that kind of speaks volumes. I really like what you said before, Jeremiah, about Michael B. Jordan kind of being his like stand-in, represents him in a way, because I think that's totally spot on. I think that he just has such depth, such humility. In the one particular interview, he just talked a lot about how it really is humility for him is about maintaining perspective. And I thought that was really insightful, because then you look at all of his movies and man, all of his characters have so many dimensions, so many moving parts, so many obvious flaws out there front and center, but also strengths out there front and center. And the villains, man, they tend to be very multifaceted. There's no cartoonish villains for him at all. They're very full-fledged characters. A lot of times folks say the best writing is, when the villain is the main character or the protagonist of their own story. And I can't think of another director, like I honestly can't, who does that better than him based on, the five that he's made thus far. There's just something about the way that he portrays the bad guy, where when you're watching his scenes, you're like, but is he bad? I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you got something about?
No, I think that ties into, so this was something I had wanted to bring up. When Black Panther came out, my wife was getting her PhD, and as such happens, you get caught up in very intense discourse about popular media and film. And one of the things that was kind of circulating around, and the group that we were hanging out with were a couple of articles. And I managed to find one by a gentleman named Russell Rickford, who kind of wrote a critique of Black Panther as being inherently kind of a Western colonialist film disguised as like a revolutionary kind of Pan-African film. And it kind of gets to that idea though of like, is Killmonger the bad guy? No, he's a revolutionary trying to break this kind of xenophobic isolationist policy of Wakanda and fight back. That was his kind of stake, or his presentation of that character in that. And I won't be able to do justice to the viewpoints expressed therein and in a lot of other articles, but it kind of does get to that idea that like the characters that Coogler has presented us with, that he's written and that he's developed are robust enough, rich enough that we can kind of look at them from multiple angles, and we can see that, you know, T'Challa keeping this legacy of keeping the country under wraps is potentially, you know, damaging not just to Wakanda itself, but to millions of other disenfranchised people around the world. And that's one of the things where he kind of takes that, him taking that lesson and running with it by the end of the film, I think is one of its merits in a way. That is, so that idea, like, we have to look at it as a fable. Like, it's not meant to represent real life, but it does interrogate some of the problems we've experienced and seen in real life, especially in the last decade here in the United States. But it was fascinating, I think, to me to see that, like, regret that T'Challa has facing down. There's this notion from, I'm not going to remember the source for this either, but this thing that I said, that it's like the army that fights with sorrow is the army that's the real victor. Like, we shouldn't be very happy about, like, doing battle with our fellow human beings. And I think that's one of the things that I've admired the most about Chadwick Boseman's portrayal of, and the way that Ryan Coogler wrote and directed Chadwick Boseman in that role, is that he's filled with some this intense sorrow when he's faced with circumstances where he has to do things through violent means. And that's something that I think is admirable about him as a character. And, like, yeah, it's cool fights, but the cool fights kind of suck because you don't want people being hurt. It's not an ideal circumstance. I'll leave it at that. I think I got us a little off track again. So my apologies there.
No, I mean, I think to that point, like, if he had the budget and the creative liberty, more so with Panther, I think it would have looked a lot different. I think a lot of, obviously, how the movie goes, it's kind of one of the impressive things with that and Wakanda Forever, that he was able to give within 2 hours such intense depth about grief, about loss, about these huge sociological issues, but also making them deeply personal, and also selling toys, but also, doing all of these things all at once is kind of like one of the things I wrote in my notes. Is I was like, when he comes out with Black Panther 3, which I'm sure is going to be excellent, we're going to be like, oh yeah, he's like another guy that made 3 superhero movies off of a particular character. And we're going to be like, oh yeah, there's 2 of them now, 2 titans that have done this exact thing and have kind of used it as a way to leverage toward further projects like Sinners, which, man, I'm glad he made Panther so that he could make Sinners. But Frank, you got something?
No, I'm sorry.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. Perfect. Well, let's see. Yeah, I mean, we've kind of been highlighting this at some level, but yeah, quick question for here is, why do we think that Coogler is influential with men? And if he is it growing? Is it diminishing? Obviously, we've done kind of different people before with our pod. We've done a thinker, we've done a fantastical character. So now it's a little bit different because we're doing a creator tour, or soon to be a tour anyway. So yeah, what would y'all say his present influence is, and kind of maybe where do you predict it going, in particular within either masculine culture, or what is it promoting for, like, masculine ideas? Let's go with Frank.
Well, I'm hoping that Ryan is going to be known for bringing that dynamic masculine character to the screen, right? Breaking boundaries, I guess, set by Hollywood. Because I might be overstepping my bounds, but, like, I think he's kind of grabbed the baton of Black directors like Spike Lee and kind of ran with it. Like, I think Spike Lee is for the time that he was making most of his movies, the late 80s, 90s, He did what he could in Hollywood with the confines, of the stereotype and breaking those stereotypes. I think Ryan Coogler has taken that and ran with it and have made these characters way more dynamic, and they're not just hood stories anymore. Like I think, uh, Spike Lee really did bring a shed a light on some of these stories of what's going on really within the Black community. And I think what Ryan Coogler now has done has saying like, yeah, these things are happening, but these people aren't just, as we had talked before, they're not the villains here, right? They're not just gang members or anything else. Like there are real Black people with real problems who are that their stories deserve to be shared, So, and I think in that sense, Ryan Coogler has taken the foundations that I feel like Spike Lee has set and just expanded on it. And I feel like he is going to continue to do that. And I think when his career is said and done, maybe in the next 20 years, when someone else has to, take the baton and move forward with these stories, we're going to look back at it and be like, look what he has done, not just for, Black communities or Black masculinity, but just for cinema in general. Right. Like we're seeing an explosion of just different cultures going up on screen. And I feel like Ryan Coogler and, I forget the director's name, Crazy Rich Asians, those sort of like directors have really highlighted different ethnicities and different cultures and showing us the humanity in these cultures. And I really think what he's doing with Masculinity, he's showing Hollywood it's okay to show people being vulnerable. They can still be heroes in their own story, not just for us and not just for the superhero suits we wear in Halloween or we give to our kids, but they're heroes to the characters that they're next to. We saw the transition from Black Panther to Wakanda Forever, and what we saw was grief. And really, we were grieving with these actors, these characters, and that it was such a great role for Chadwick Boseman that his passing affected entire movie, and we got to see these characters and grieve with these characters because we felt so connected with who Ryan Coogler decided to put on screen in Chadwick Boseman and the Black Panther that we were just devastated to hear the news. And he connected with us. He made a movie that directly connected with us and what we were feeling. And we were able to ride this grief train, I guess, with these characters. And I think this is going to be something that we move forward with in Hollywood, where real life can be reflected in the movies multidimensionally. Like there are a few producers and directors that can really connect with the audience and having life reflect on the silver screen. But I don't think I don't think any one of those I can say are Black, that are doing it at this level. So I think he's really going to change I mean, we see what he did with Sinners, where he basically that's his movie, after I think 15 years, there's a time limit where it's all his because that was something that he definitely wanted. And we saw that movie and we were like, amazed with just everything that was in it. I think he is changing the industry and saying like we can create our own stories where they can be our own, where they can be the people's and not just some regurgitated Hollywood movie that we get every year. Like this is every movie that he makes is basically a hit. It's amazing because he's able to connect with us. And I think that's something that we're going to be able to move forward.
John and Chu.
Yes. And director of Wicked and Wicked for Good, which I very much look forward to seeing.
That's right. Yes.
As a guy who came up through theater programs and denied liking musicals, but secretly liked musicals. There you go.
Speaking of growing up in theater, I did theater myself. Jeremiah was my director. And what I like about Ryan Coogler was, like you said, he was a football player, just like me. And, I acted, but I got punished for acting and not playing football. So it was like, oh, well, but the fact that he can be this person now who's well-rounded, I feel like I'm better off for doing that stuff. Like I fell in love with the arts and I was still able to do sports, and I feel like that's kind of the message we need to be telling kids now. Like you can do everything and still be a full rounded man. So yeah, Jeremiah was an okay director, by the way.
It's weird. This is strange. No, I'm sure you were fabulous. You've got the look of exceedingly auteur yourself sort of vibes coming off here.
It was a musical, by the way. So
Oh, wonderful.
the most artsy you can get.
What was the musical? Now I got to know. Now I'm derailing us for real.
Into the Woods.
Into the Woods.
Yeah.
A classic. My goodness.
Yeah.
One of my favorites.
Who were you? One of the princes?
No, I couldn't sing.
Oh, well, there you
So
go.
he made me the mysterious man.
That's a good thing to do.
Yeah. You just sit there and narrate.
Yeah, you did it right.
Can't hold much soup. This interesting. That is actually my story as well. I also came up doing football, and then I'd always loved the arts and decided to do that myself. So I guess we all have that in common with Mr. Coogler, which is interesting, or that you and I at least have that in common with Mr. Coogler. The thing. So to kind of take the conversation a different direction, you asked Caleb what you think makes his work popular with men. I would say it's sexiness. He kind of has a tender sexuality that suffuses the like intimate moments of his film. And I think it's hard not to, I think it's important to kind of acknowledge that as an element of like what it is, when we're thinking about masculinity as a whole, like, in this case, like as a very heterosexual lens that I think most of this is taken through. But in Sinners, like Sinners is a ridiculously sexy movie. And then you have, you talked about the circumstance where Black Panther jumps down and is surprised by finding like the love of his life there waiting for him. And is like, that's what shocks him out of it. And we're like, the superhero films that Marvel put out were, for the most part, until Chloe Zhao did something weird with the Eternals, relatively sexless. But there's this appeal that, like, I think, having watched Fruitvale Station today, the way that he portrays the relationship between Oscar Grant and then his girlfriend Fina, and the tenderness that he shows to her, and they're like in the intimate scenes that they have together, and then the way that he is like kind of in his family life, like I think is a really meaningful way. It kind of shows this idea of like, being able to be strong but vulnerable at the same time, kind of carries through even into those expressions of intimacy. So I think that is something that not a lot of filmmakers do well, because a lot of times it goes really explicit for the sake of like, oh, well, we're going to hold people's attention, or it's like, it just feels kind of stilted or forced or not particularly natural. And I don't think I've been unconvinced by romance in his movies. And it goes true with the relationship between Adonis, Michael B. Jordan, and Tessa Thompson's character, whose name I forget, from Creed as well. They're like that kind of, the way that there's that like playful flirtation and like, the care and like the way that they become attached, and he's still so supportive of her work. And like, as she's trying to figure out who she is. And then like, she's, comes back, and there's, there are fights, and there's all that stuff that happens. But I think that's an element that is going to be contributing to his personality or his popularity with men as well, is the fact that he can do that and do it well.
I think to that point, what comes to mind as you're saying that is, it's sort of like him reclaiming like what a healthy male gaze can look like. Like what healthy dating, healthy courting, healthy connection, like what it can be, what it can manifest as. It doesn't have to have, the Michael Bay Transformers pornification shot from that one famous shot in the original Transformers, and so much of what Michael Bay does. Oh my gosh, we'll do something about him later. But he just, there's the tenderness there, but there's not a shying away from how bodies look, from how attraction goes, from how flirting actually happens, right? Like, real quick, just because I've done it with other people that we've done thus far, and I'm a huge personality type testing nerd guy, and I really love the Enneagram. So what I would find for what I think Coogler may identify as, if you were to take the test, I don't know, only you can know, but it seems like it's very much type 9. So type 9s are what's called the peacemaker, and they tend to be really good about connecting with others, being mediators, and they themselves being able to see multiple perspectives really, really easily, almost better than most other folks, most other personalities out there. So I think to Bob's point, like that's kind of why a lot of the romances look a little different per each story and movie. Some are like much more overtly sexy, like in Sinners. Some are a little bit more subtle and kind of almost sweet, like Fruitvale Station or even Black Panther. But there's a sincerity that I think makes it easy for you to root for the characters, and also like a resistance from like contrived, corny Hollywood, Nicholas Sparksian cheese that we just don't want. I know we're men in a masculinity pod, but we can like romance stories, and within that we want like good ones. And he consistently kind of shows compelling, compelling love stories. So
Yeah, my favorite, to your point though, Caleb, my favorite movies growing up in the 90s were all rom-coms, but I hate The Notebook with a deep and abiding hatred. It is one of my least favorite pieces of cinema I've ever seen in my life. I almost walked out of the theater. I have done that. I have walked out of one movie in my life, and it wasn't even my choice. It was Harriet the Spy, and my dad was like, "This is so mean. We need to leave, kids." But I almost walked out of The Notebook. I just couldn't do it. But I'll leave that for another conversation. I love rom-coms, so I'm happy to talk about them at any point in the future.
yeah. What you got, Jeremiah? We haven't heard from you for a bit.
You're asking, I mean, the question still, what makes him popular even among men? Because I do think that he has a broad appeal, and I think it has a lot to do with he's not afraid to do in his movies. Because I think about like, why do we tell stories? Why historically have we as human beings told stories? If it's just purely, we're just here to tell you the facts, then I think that it would be derisive. But I mean, historically, like we sit around, I mean, you sat around the fire and the storyteller would begin to tell, who are we? And then also, who are we supposed to be? And in his stories, he's trying to communicate, I think, to us as an audience, who are we? But I think I think it's too whitewashing to say, who are we as human beings? I think he wants to talk about who are we as Black people, right? Like who are we as Black men? And it doesn't mean that becomes a race issue. I think it's important that he's talking about, what does it mean? Because you look at Sinners and you look at the difference between like these two brothers, right? Twins. Okay. Something Frank knows a little bit about. First of all, what does it mean? Like, right? To be Black men in the late 80s, right? But they're people of power. Like in the town, they're people of power. Outside of that town, like you start to see like, oh, well, it's the white people still, the racism, the way they keep people down, etc. And then you, as the story goes on, spoiler alerts all over the place here, and you realize that they've stolen from very powerful people to get the money to start a new life. And you go, okay, well, that's bad things. And it's like, well, these people, who are these guys and why did they do what they did? And so it's important. Like he's trying to tell a story, but why did we tell these stories? Right. And he's talking about these men who've had hard upbringings, hard lives, and could choose just to be violent for the rest of their lives. And you would say, well, that's justified, but they don't. They don't want to continue that life. They are trying to find a way to create a life, not just of being a peacemaker, but of peace, but a life that is fruitful and a life that is filled with joy and laughter and friendship, because it's not going to last. It's not always going to be that way. There's always going to be something that comes along to try to steal that from you or to violently rip it from you. And he's trying to tell us, like through T'Challa, what does it mean to be a Black man in a world that thinks that you're backwaters, right? The entire country of America and all the news media and everybody else was like, Wakanda, there's this backwater country. Nobody even cares about you. They think less of you because you refuse to share all of you. And as soon as it's known that they are more than, all of a sudden becomes what capitalist societies all do, and that's just about greed. Whereas they have built a society on the opposite, given the chance to thrive. And that's the point, right? Like, given the chance, if the war on drugs, I use big quotation mark there, hadn't been introduced as a mechanism by white middle-aged men in political power to basically put more black men into prison in order to create a cycle and a system in which they are then systematically forced to be viewed as violent criminal men, then what would that look like today? And I think he was saying Wakanda would. These men were kings in their countries. And T'Challa is a king, and his father was a king. Like, he's looking down at him saying, but even as kings, they fail their own people at times. And then the I think the fight there is that. So I think there is that sense in which it's a popular story because these are stories that need to be told, because we need to hear these stories, because we've been ignoring these stories, because we've only been telling our version of those stories. And he's finally be able to tell those stories in a way that Spike Lee couldn't, I agree with you, pass the baton, in a way that Jordan Peele can't tell those same stories. There is a way in which he is getting straight through the noise of Hollywood to tell powerful, personal stories about what it means to be masculine, to be absolutely masculine without being James Bond or any of John Wayne's characters, the silent but deadly archetypes, because that's the struggle. He continues to portray that struggle, I think, for me, of these men who everyone sees one way because that's what they're trained to see, and then for who they really are. And that's it. That closeness, that intimacy is so rich and so attractive to an audience. But I think men in particular, today's men in particular, that's why, I mean, I know that's cliche, but I mean, some of the Tom Cruise's, like the Mission Impossible stuff, it's like, well, I'm here for the stunts that he's doing, but I just don't think that he's that masculine because, kind of, what is that? It's an action movie. It's just constant action. Where's the heart of the story? Where is the person in the story? Why do I feel anything for you? And I would even say the same thing about a lot of the action based movies. And I just go, he gets you closer to the person without being cheesy.
Yeah. So another movie that comes to mind is John Wick in that regard, with it being like it's just a lot of action. It's like you care more about the dog in John Wick than you do about literally anything else.
Well, and
it's a franchise that got started because of a dog. That's the thing that's phenomenal.
Killed a dog.
It's missing. That heart was gone. It was kind of missing, like lacking so much. So,
well, he's partly responsible for that. Keanu Reeves, he said in interviews that he told the screenwriters that he's going to charge them an egregious amount of money per word that he speaks by the last movie, because he didn't want to speak. He wanted the actor to. He was like, "This is just an action movie. It's not a heart. I'm not doing anything else. I just want this character to be put through the ringer, etc." And so that's literally, there's like 50 words. I think there's like some small number of words that he actually speaks in the last John Wick movie because he threatened to force them to pay him per word.
He's like,
Keanu, we're coming for you in this pod.
But on the other end, I go, that's a brilliant move if that's the way you want to tell your story, and you don't want to get boxed into having to do something else with the character. And because he wanted the character to be silent, essentially, the silent assassin who when the save the cat moments are when he's protecting somebody or protecting a friend or getting revenge for, like, he goes, those are the things, that's the heart of the character. You understand that he's a good guy. Why does he have to keep saying it? A very different,
he's like
tactic.
The anti Charles Dickens.
Yeah.
Like, I'll make you pay me per word, but you're still going to pay me a lot of money.
Yeah, well, very, very fruitful discussion. So yeah, one of the main goals in Influ-Men-Sirs, right, is as a pod, or kind of just in our broad world right now, where a lot of things thrown at you, a lot of informational pieces. And a part of my goal and our goal just broadly with this is that this is as formative as it is informational. So in other words, how does this stuff really hit us at home, hit us in our own masculinity? and yeah, within our, whether it be our pain, our struggles, our strengths, anything in between. So what I thought I might do is I'll head off this question, kind of give my answer, and then feel free once I've wrapped to kind of chime in with yours, and yeah, we'll kind of go from there. But so this will be a bit loaded just because the way that the story of Wakanda Forever uh, occurs, where it is Shuri grieving the loss of her brother, it's something near and dear to me. It's something that I myself am doing the same. So when I first watched the movie, it hit in a different way, right? I really enjoyed it, thoughtful, everything that we've been saying about Coogler up to this point. Great villain, great storytelling. Oh my gosh, you're letting people be people. You're letting actors act. Like, thank goodness, finally. But then watching it this time, I felt like Ryan Coogler gave me a gift. I kind of felt like, especially in the final frames where Shuri's on the beach, she's kind of in her thoughts. Ooh, getting a little choked up here. Yeah, and she's just having images of her brother. Yeah, it just really, it really hit me. As someone that's loved movies for a really long time, one thing that we kind of hinted at, I kind of mentioned before, we got a lot of heady guys in this space. You know, Nolan, yep, we know you're really smart, bro. You know, Scorsese, yes, you're really smart, bro. Like a lot of these guys making heady pieces. But man, it felt like Ryan was like, I'm with you. I'm with you. And obviously, you know, kind of goes without saying, I'm a white guy, so at some level, this is a black story. This is not necessarily for me, but in that moment, that pain I could connect to, that grieving I could connect to, and I just really appreciated that he didn't shy away from it. That even how the film and the writing was kind of just from the jump. We are grieving Chadwick Boseman. Forget any other thing that this movie is supposed to do, supposed to accomplish. Like, who really gives a rip? All it is we're grieving this guy. And so it kind of just revisiting it, it really gave me an opportunity to have a space where my grief could be displayed on screen. Again, it's not different. It's not completely the same, but the loss of a sibling, that's directly what they were talking about. So yeah, I know it's a bit on the heavier side, but that was kind of part of why I wanted to do him to begin with, is because I just really connected with a lot of his movies about grief and being able to directly connect in that way. Who'd like to go next?
Well, I mean, when it comes to Ryan Coogler and his body of work, as a minority, a black man growing up, I didn't see as much as myself in Spike Lee movies as much as I saw it in Ryan Coogler's movies, right? Like, I do understand what it is to struggle to figure out who you are as a man, as a person. I mean, watching Black Panther like a million times and then seeing the layers in a Marvel movie where you see black on black crime and fatherless children, how they grow up in their perspective, and all the other person was trying to do was break out of tradition, and it left his son fatherless, and how Chadwick Boseman's character, Black Panther T'Challa, decided, I'm also going to break away from tradition, but I have the power that this person didn't have. I have the power to actually make some change, and so me being in a place of privilege, right? Like, I grew up in Chino Hills, I went to a private school. What does that mean for me being black? Like, I struggled with that identity for a very long time. What the media portrays as black, do I fit that? Not at all. I've had a bunch of white friends tell me, you're not like them, and I don't know what that means, but I mean, we know what it means. But it's like, like, struggling with that identity. Okay, so then who am I supposed to be? And then, you go into his Creed movies where you have a young black man struggling with the death of his dad, and how do I fill those shoes? And my one of my father figures was my grandfather, and how do I, as a man, be that? And growing up and trying to figure out how to do that, and then watching Sinners, and then seeing these tough black men, particularly I think it was Smoke, right? Was he the one with the um I always forget who they are since they're twins. Anyways, this is the struggle now with I see that people have with me and my brother, where he had the ex-wife, where he had the child with, you know, and you see this really tough man just be completely vulnerable with the person he loves, and you were able to see him emotionally get undressed in front of the camera. And so, like, how do I as a person balance all of that? As a black man, I have a societal depiction of who I'm supposed to be, but I know who I want to be. And so how do I maintain those things and still navigate, the societal norms, that are within society? Like, I find myself code switching all the time. So it's like you see that in his movies, and then suddenly you go, okay, like this is all normal, right? Just in the little scene in Sinners where you see them with the Asian shopkeepers. And in one shop, they're talking one way, and they literally code switch in the next scene, to talk to the other white Southerners another way. It was just, you see all of these things happening in Coogler's movies that are so layered is what resonates with me, that makes me go, oh, wait, that's me too. I remember that when I was in high school. I remember struggling through these things in college. I remember trying to figure out who I was as a man. And now that I'm like, I feel like, I mean, we're always growing, but I feel like I'm a much better person now, almost at 40 years old, where I'm more confident. But I see those things happening in his movies and I go, yeah, I remember going through those trials to become the person that I am today, who I can be vulnerable with my wife. I can very much express and be happy around children and love them and not feel like I am betraying this view of masculinity upon me. Like, I can be all of that, and I can do musicals and play football. That was totally okay. Like, it's fine. And so those are some of the things that I think Ryan Coogler really brings to life for me. And I'm able to connect with his movies for those reasons, where I can see a part of myself in those movies. And so for me, like, that's what makes me so attracted to anything Ryan Coogler.
Yeah, thank you, Frank.
Yeah, of course.
Who's up next?
I want to hear from Jeremiah.
Oh, me. um, so I think I connect mostly to his. I think to the director itself. I mean, he shows me so much empathy. Um, as a person, there's not a veneer between me and him, and so the characters that he kind of creates and helps me to live through, because I think that's the whole point of listening to a story or watching a story is to live through that experience, is to kind of process every time, like the empathy. He just helps me to process each of those things. So I'm watching Creed and I just go, that's me processing my own father-son issues, the legacy that he leaves, he's still alive, but left to me, being one thing. And like everybody in your family knows who that is. And so the struggle that they have of like, this is what we loved about him, this is what we hate about him, kind of thing. And whenever you like, and then you also know those things. And I go, oh, this is what I loved about my dad. But these are the things I really don't. And I kind of, every time I see those things in myself, I kind of go, ugh, I don't like that. I'm trying to work to be a better person than that. Um, and when I watch Creed, I definitely see him because he's a kid fighting. It's in him. And it's not even rage. Like, he's not even rage. He's not like angry, just fighting because he's mad about something. It's just in him to fight. Um, and you go, well, that's a legacy part of it, but I think to Frank's earlier points about him not wanting to be seen as his dad, to be his own man, but he's still a fighter. And then how is he going to be different? Because I think that his mom, sees too much of his dad. And that's what hurts her the most, is she watched this man kill himself. And she doesn't want that for her son. So there's that family struggle of who do you become? Um, And so I don't know. I feel like that every time I watch something, I see something in myself that um that challenges me to think, to feel, and to grow.
That was I'm actually really glad you brought up the relationship that Adonis Creed has with his mother in Creed, or I guess, but the way I remember it, and it has been such a long time since I've seen it, is he's like got that close relationship with Apollo Creed's wife, but she's not his biological mom. She's kind of like his adoptive
His
mom.
adopted mom, yeah.
Yeah. And then so it's that notion that she has this resentment for him as well, where
Mhm.
that he's having to fight against and have to say, like, he's wrestling with that understanding of like, I know I'm a remind, like she says, I think at one point in the film, like, you're a living remind, something to the effect of, you're a living reminder of his infidelity. Like, here's this man that I loved and that was so kind and like loving to me in return. And then you're the proof that like he slipped up and he
Yeah.
had an affair with someone else, and then you're just this living element of it, but she's still so caring to him. And then the fact that like that's one of the things that I think all of us have talked about at some point, is that sort of realism that comes into this space, um that I think is we Spike Lee's come up a couple of times, and there's sort of that like kind of heightened, hyperbolic, really stylized approach to things like you get in Do the Right Thing, where there's sort of like this angular lines that kind of delineate the characters and the relationships and like what they have, and then it's very like it feels very sharp, but a lot of Coogler's work feels like it's got more of this kind of spiritual ombre effect, like it kind of blends in together in a way that like you can see that each person contains like a whole spectrum of feelings that they're wrestling with. Um, and that's one of the things that I think makes his work so beautiful, and I think really represents like the way he can kind of show masculinity in that regard of like, or what the struggles of being a man, um, and particularly a black man are. And we were wrestling with, in some ways, some tropes there, like unfaithful spouse, has multiple children by other women, and but it's done in such a way that it's like it doesn't come across in that stereotypical sense. It's that like it's a very different kind of story that he manages to tell in that space. And for me, having watched Fruitvale Station today, I thought it was incredibly powerful. Like, it's a film about martyrdom. I mean, it's a film in the same way that's kind of in the fact that the very last question any of the characters in the film asks is his daughter saying, "Where's Daddy? Where's Dad?" Oh, now I'm gonna tear up, Caleb. You're not the only one here. Um, it's just it's that it shows the human cost of of these kinds of conflicts and violence, and you get that even in his superhero films. You don't want was it Tlalocan? My gosh. You don't want them fighting Wakanda. You want them to have their own, like, there's no reason that they have to be at odds with one another. But and then you see like in the end there, you see the cost on both sides of that conflict. And you don't want this civil war breaking out in Wakanda with the people who, like, I think justifiably say like, hey, we can help a lot of people. Versus the people who are like, whoa, no, we got to stay isolated. Like, what can we do? Like, if we go out there and we're dropping bombs on people, we're just another colonial power imposing our will on others. And the really big ideas he's able to wrestle with in these ways are really fascinating to me. But yeah, the dad stuff really hit me hard in Fruitvale Station. And yeah, I'll let you continue on with you. I know you have a slate of questions, Caleb, so we can kind of keep moving through those.
I actually had a question because of something that you said. You emphasized, the adopted mother, and obviously, like in something else I've noticed, all of Ryan Coogler's movies is he also has strong female leads, right?
Yes. Oh yeah.
And so, what does that say about what he thinks masculinity? And of course, we're talking about Black masculinity in this sense, that even if they're heroes or tough guys or whatever, like it's these women who tend to be they adjust the sails, right? Like these men who are very flawed, and really we see the women interjecting and going, well, you don't got all the answers, bro. So it's like what does that say about what he thinks, Ryan Coogler, what he's depicting about masculinity, and I guess more specifically Black masculinity or the Black culture and how they have masculinity, like so I wanted to open up that question. What were the things that you guys got from his movies that, like, how did you feel when you saw those things?
That's great. Do you mind if I keep going, Caleb? Or
Go
because
for it.
I have some
Go for it.
thoughts. Like, so first thing is my favorite character in any of the Black Panther movies is Okoye, hands down. Like, she's amazing. Danai Gurira is just incredible in that role. And I think that, the fact that she comes across as like both very feminine and very masculine in the same way. She's got this sort of like androgynous power, but not every woman in his films, fits into, like, the strong women in his films don't fit into that same mold. Each of them has their kind of different thing. Going back to Fruitvale Station, the tension with the way that he's portrayed, that he and Michael B. Jordan portray Oscar Grant, is his constant bids for connection with his mother. And like, it starts out with him wanting to spend time with her on his birthday. And he's like texting her saying, hey, I can come by your place for, I was thinking, first thing he does is he calls her, say, hey, maybe why don't you call off work today? We can go hang out. And she says, no, I'm already here. The place would fall apart without me. And he texts her when he's going to get gas. And then there's that really tragic moment. I guess dead dogs are going to be a theme tonight too. The tragic moment where the dog gets struck by the car. He's chasing that guy down, trying to save the dog, but he texts his mom and says, that all starts with him texting his mom saying, hey, why don't we go get lunch? I can be in your area and go pick you up and get lunch. But he's like, there's this, it's this intense respect that you see on display for the women in that film that was really, really struck me in a way as well. Like the vulnerability he has, like not being able to confess to his girlfriend that he's lost his job, but he's still like willing to help his sister out with rent, even though their times are tough for him. And there's that scene in the grocery store, and this plays off with like, it's sort of the dramatized retelling of the video of Oscar Grant's killing at Fruitvale Station, where, there was a woman recording the incident happening with the police, the altercation, but that comes from him like stopping and talking to a woman in a grocery store. And like, she's so uncomfortable about trying to find like recipes for how to fry fish. And he calls his grandmother, and there's this constant female presence. And it's like, gosh, where's this, that's like kind of reinforcing or sort of like helping to shape this vision of what it means to be a man. And that the more poisonous voices in this conversation about masculinity right now, saying like, oh no, you have to assert your dominance and like, you've got to be the man and like show, how tough you are. Whereas like, there's this, like, I think on display in that film is this kind of like gallantry in a way, I don't want to use chivalry because that's like a troubled term as well, but he's just so like, there's deference and respect and affection that's very unguarded in a way that he's like trying to get these connections with women. And like, it's a facet of who that character is. And it's a testament to Michael B. Jordan's just phenomenal talent as an actor as well, that he's able to portray all of that. There's several books that have come up with that are talking about like loneliness and like men who have an unhealthy. There's like two books, one by Haruki Murakami and another by someone else that I can't remember, but they're painting like these men who have very troubled relationships with themselves and society and the world. And both books are called Men Without Women. I have to look up what the other one is, but it's that idea that it's like sort of this absence of the balance, like the feminine influence in your life as a man can really limit your ability to kind of like healthily grapple and shape what you can be as a man. As well. Caleb, I interrupted you to kind of go off on a just word vomit stream here. So I
No, it's
want to know what you have to
all on
say.
point. All on point, man. What I was gonna say is that speaking to why, or what I would argue is the prominence and the insistence on prominence of women in his stories is, I think, kind of in line with his real emphasis on making his stories, have heart, like a lot of heart. And that's almost like a sentimental, cheesy word. I don't necessarily mean it in that manner. I mean, so much of what he's trying to display on screen is informed by feeling, kind of above everything else. But yeah, kind of like having women prominently in the story allows for we've talked about empathy we've talked about grief, we've talked about all these sort of like emotive things, emotive qualities. And this is not my like overgeneralizing and saying like, oh, that's women come into stories only to inform feeling, only to, because that's not what I'm saying. But I mean more that having a lot of women present in his movies where, per my knowledge, except for Wakanda Forever, the primary character has been male, has led to an easier time connecting with these characters. These aren't just stories where it's like, oh, look at Nolan doing his time thing, right? Oh, look at Denis Villeneuve doing his, awesome stuff. I do love Villeneuve, but it is so much more about letting the characters, letting the story breathe and giving it as much emotion as possible, to the point that you kind of get like enraptured in it. Like, for example, in Sinners, my goodness gracious, the last time that I had a out of body chills, holy crap moment, like the music video moment in that movie, was The Dark Knight. So that's like saying a lot. It just was such a moment where, per my opinion, he wanted to again inform the feeling of, this is a situation where, as this character is playing blues, right? And he's playing a song for himself, but he's also playing a song for his family. He's playing a song for decades and decades of the slavery they've experienced and now the Jim Crow that they've experienced and all these sorts of things. It is so informed by something ethereal, something other than, and that's why it has that spiritual quality, and then transcends being what I observe, at least from other directors, being too heady, being up their own butts too much, you might say. I never see Coogler do that at all. That scene was very stylized. It was very out there, but in the best way possible. So informed by feeling, so enthralling. And I think that, but I just think that I'm just walking away, I guess, and saying that he produces more feeling per reel than most other directors out there, and I, for one, really appreciate that.
Well, I think when you're looking at from that perspective, I think to be less comparative across the board, I think everybody as directors, they eventually you have a vision and then you're bringing that to you. So like you mentioned, Denis Villeneuve, like he's got scale. He's able to tell massive stories in ways that are approachable, because he's able to zone in, but he's also able to pull all the way back, and you're able to go, that we haven't seen that since we've seen westerns, just the scale. And then but I think Christopher Nolan is a master at what he does, and he has a very distinctiveness to his storytelling. And the same I would say for most directors who gain notoriety. Each of them, M. Night Shyamalan, he's the twist man. When you hear the name, you go, I'm waiting for the twist. So you go, oh, so you have to be paying closer attention. So he wants you to get step closer to the screen. And I think for Coogler, I think what was important to him was to tell stories that mattered, stories that did make you think and feel, and to show off that filmmaking is about empathy, and it is about not giving you stereotypes because you don't listen to stereotypes. But when you see these are people, and people that look and feel and sound a whole lot like yourself, like the inside of yourself. I think then you sit down and you watch, and I think he wants you in that space of just listening and feeling and experiencing something, and that's different. But I mean, there's room for The Conjuring too. Like all these movies that are and the Friday the 13th, and even for The Notebook. Sorry, but there's a world out there in which somebody felt something that they needed to hear and feel. But I mean, there's a whole different worldview because it's not even like an auteur director at that point.
And no shade on the people who like The Notebook.
A little bit. A little bit.
It's
You can
just
throw
not
enough
my
shade.
thing. It's
But
not
we'll
my
throw shade.
no.
And
I
I
love notebooks. I have a lot of notebooks. I write in them. I read out of them, but I don't need a movie about them.
Yeah. But for me, I think that's why do I keep coming back? Why do I hear his name now and go, "Oh, I'm interested." The same for like John M. Chu. Like I'm interested because I think that he's such a visionary. I think that he tells very powerful stories, but he's just so visually stunning to watch. And because he believes in the practicality, but he also believes because he's a maximalist. He's going to throw everything he can at you on a screen, but it's so organized that you don't get overwhelmed. I'm always just sparkled by his everything from the Crazy Rich Asians, where the culture takes front and center, but it's the wedding and like the magnitude of all of the luxury and the maximalist there, and the way that he did Wicked, those sets were all practical, and he has some CGI elements that he's able to bring in there, but because that practicality is there, you focus in on the people, and because the story is so strong and the musical is already strong, he gave you more. So I think that's why I come back to Ryan Coogler, why I will continue to come back to him until he says, I'm done.
Yeah, I mean, on that point, and maybe a place to wrap is in one of his interviews, he says, as soon as I make movies that don't connect, I'm done. I was like,
Yeah.
there we go.
Yeah.
You can slam the mic on that point. But yeah, I mean, any last thoughts, or we feel like that's a wrap right there?
So when it comes to the question I had brought up with the strong women, right? Like, what does that say about masculinity in itself? Like, does that like the traditional masculinity that we see in cinema, right, is about getting the woman, right, becoming this tough guy. Even the manosphere that we see now on the internet and with that's engulfing these children, it's about getting women and obtaining wealth and doing these things for the adoration of women. Really what it's really saying is like, are we peacocking as men? Are we showing our masculinity just for women? Whereas I feel like with Ryan Coogler, they're not doing it for women, right? The women are very much key figures in framing their masculinity. Um, and I really love that perspective from Ryan Coogler of allowing women in the space of masculinity. Um, so I mean, I think that's one of the things that I really loved about his movies is every single one of his characters respected and loved and cherished the information that these women really had. So that's the reason why I brought up that question. How does that look, to us? How are we framing our masculinity now moving forward? I think there is space for femininity. I think there is space for, feminism. I don't believe you can be a masculine man if you're not actually like seeing women as your equal and they're not prizes to be won. This is your own life. And I feel like a lot of what Ryan Coogler is showing us is these men are not trying to achieve things for the adoration of others, but instead to kind of discover themselves. And I think that's a lot of what we can learn as far as men and what masculinity should be. So that's, yeah.
I do think we
But
could
yeah, we can
probably
wrap it.
sign. I was going to say, I think we can sign off right there. I think, yeah, hit it. All right, fellas. Well, great talking with y'all. Great discussion as always. We'll see you next time. Hey, y'all. Caleb here. Thank you for listening to our show today. Please like and subscribe wherever the heck you listen to pods. And make sure to follow us on all the socials at Influ-Men-Sirs. That is INFLU-men-Sirs. We'll see you next time. Peace.